The ceasefire is on life support. That's not a metaphor. That's the President of the United States talking. Trump told reporters Monday that the ceasefire with Iran is on massive life support. And when you understand why, the ground beneath this entire conflict starts to shake. Iran sent back a counterproposal through mediator Pakistan, and Trump didn't just reject it, he called it totally unacceptable on Truth Social, saying Iran has been playing games for 47 years. But here's what the headlines won't tell you. Tehran didn't come back empty-handed. Iran proposed suspending uranium enrichment, diluting portions of its highly enriched stockpile, and transferring the rest to a third country. It called for ending hostilities across the entire region, including Lebanon, and demanded maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz before nuclear talks could even begin. That is not the behavior of a country surrendering. That is a country drawing red lines of its own. Inside the Pentagon right now, there are officials actively pushing for targeted strikes to further weaken Tehran's negotiating position. Others are fighting to keep diplomacy alive. Meanwhile, Brent crude has already crossed $104 a barrel, and the global economy is watching every word out of Washington and Tehran with shaking hands. Let me tell you something that most people sitting at home watching cable news are completely missing right now. When Trump said that ceasefire was on massive life support, he wasn't speaking in metaphors. He was giving you a diagnosis. And the patient, the fragile, barely breathing idea that this conflict between the United States and Iran could end through talking is turning blue on the table. This war started on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched strikes on Iran, strikes that shook the world and shattered what little was left of a diplomatic window. And now, more than 10 weeks later, we are sitting in a moment that is arguably more dangerous than the very first night the bombs fell, because at least on night one, the world knew what was happening. Today, we're in the fog. We're in that murky, dangerous space between a ceasefire that isn't holding and a war that never truly ended. And in that space, decisions get made that change everything. Now, I want you to understand something about the Iranian position, because the American media has been absolutely shameless in how it has covered this. Tehran did not come back to the table with empty hands. Tehran did not sit in the corner and stonewall. Iran proposed suspending uranium enrichment, diluting portions of its highly enriched stockpile, and transferring the rest to a neutral third country. It demanded that the first stage of negotiations focus on ending the war across the entire region, including the ongoing strikes in Lebanon, and that maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz be guaranteed before secondary talks about the nuclear program could even begin. Now tell me, what part of that sounds like a country that is simply playing games? That sounds like a negotiating position. That sounds like a country that has drawn its red lines and is defending its national sovereignty. You can disagree with those lines. You can argue they are too ambitious, but you cannot sit there and tell me that Iran showed up empty-handed. Trump called the Iranian proposal garbage. He called it totally unacceptable. He went on Truth Social and said Iran had been playing games for 47 years. And look, I understand the frustration. I genuinely do. But here is where I need you to slow down and think carefully, because the frustration of a president does not equal a military strategy. And there is a very serious difference between a man venting on social media and a nation deciding to resume full-scale combat operations against a country that is still standing, still armed, and still blockading one of the most important waterways on the face of the earth. CENTCOM has prepared a plan for a short and powerful wave of strikes on Iran, likely including infrastructure targets, in hopes of breaking the negotiating deadlock. The hope would be that Iran would then return to the negotiating table, showing more flexibility on the nuclear issue. Another plan expected to be shared with Trump is focused on taking over part of the Strait of Hormuz to reopen it to commercial shipping, and that operation could include ground forces. Another option that has been discussed is a special forces operation to secure Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Now let that sink in for a moment. A special forces operation inside Iran to physically seize hundreds of kilograms of highly enriched uranium. That is not a surgical strike. That is a ground incursion into a sovereign nation that is already at war with you. That is a scenario where American soldiers, your sons and daughters, would be on the ground inside Iranian territory fighting for uranium. Think about what that means. A briefing similar to the one being prepared now was given to Trump on February 26th, 2 days before the United States and Israel launched the war against Iran. One source close to Trump said that briefing contributed to Trump's decision to go to war. So when I tell you that history matters in this conversation, I mean it literally. The last time CENTCOM sat down with this president and walked him through military options on a screen, bombs started falling 48 hours later. We are at that moment again. And this time, The stakes are even higher because the world is already economically strained, the Strait of Hormuz is already blocked, and oil is already trading at over $100 a barrel. The U.S. war against Iran has cost $29 billion so far, a figure $4 billion higher than what senior Pentagon officials told Congress just 2 weeks ago. $29 billion. And it is climbing. Every week this drags on, that number grows. Every week the strait stays blocked, the global economy bleeds. The CEO of Saudi Aramco told investors that if the Strait of Hormuz opened today, it would still take months for the energy market to rebalance, and if the opening is delayed by just a few more weeks, normalization will extend all the way into 2027. We are not talking about a temporary blip in your gas prices. We are talking about a structural shock to the global energy system that will outlast whatever deal or destruction comes next. And that brings me to the man who is flying to Beijing right now, because this conflict is no longer just about the United States and Iran staring each other down across a conference table. This conflict has pulled in the most powerful player on earth, China. Trump arrived in Beijing for his first state visit to China since 2017, heading into talks with President Xi Jinping amid what the International Energy Agency has called the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Some 20,000 seafarers remain stranded on roughly 2,000 vessels in and around the Strait of Hormuz, according to the International Maritime Organization. 20,000 human beings stranded because of a conflict that the American political class still talks about as if it's a bilateral negotiation between two parties. It is not. It has never been just that. About 38% of the oil and 23% of the liquefied natural gas that typically passes through the Hormuz Strait is bound for Chinese ports. Overall, that accounts for about half of China's seaborne oil supply and a sixth of its natural gas. So when Washington says to Beijing, pressure Tehran, lean on Iran, stop buying Iranian crude, what they are actually saying is sacrifice your own energy security on our behalf. And China is not going to do that. Analysts say Washington is unlikely to persuade Beijing to yield on its demand to stop Iranian oil purchases. I don't believe China will give in to any U.S. demands to stop buying Iranian oil, said Robin Mills, CEO of Kamar Energy. And yet, that is the card Trump is playing in Beijing right now. He is sitting across from Xi Jinping, expecting leverage that he simply does not have. Now, I want to address something that has been driving me absolutely crazy in this whole media conversation. There are commentators, supposedly serious people, who keep framing this as Trump being tough and Iran being stubborn, as if this is some kind of a schoolyard standoff where the bigger kid just needs to push harder. That framework is dangerous and it is wrong, because what you are actually looking at is a situation where two sides have genuinely incompatible red lines and both sides know it. Trump has made Iran's nuclear capability a non-negotiable red line, insisting the Strait of Hormuz must reopen first before any nuclear talks, while Iran has refused to dismantle its nuclear facilities and rejected what it called a demand for surrender. The United States wants Iran to abandon 40 years of strategic deterrence infrastructure in exchange for sanctions relief. Iran is willing to dilute uranium and offer some concessions, but it is not willing to hand over the keys to its national survival. And honestly, ask yourself, would any nation, would any government facing the kind of military assault Iran has already endured simply agree to disarm completely? Netanyahu went on 60 Minutes and said plainly that the war is not over, that there are still enrichment sites that have to be dismantled, proxies that Iran still supports, and ballistic missiles they still want to produce. And when asked how the uranium would be removed, he said, you go in and you take it out. You go in and you take it out. That is the Israeli prime minister on American primetime television, openly calling for a military operation to physically seize Iran's nuclear material. And Netanyahu revealed that Trump had told him personally, I want to go in there. Those are not the words of a man who is committed to diplomacy. Those are the words of a man who is being pulled toward a decision that could reshape the entire geopolitical order of the 21st century. And here is what troubles me most about where we are right now. The ceasefire, which has been massive life support in the president's own words, has not actually produced peace. Some aides to Trump have said he is now more seriously considering resuming combat operations in Iran. And inside the administration, there is a visible split. Some officials, including those at the Pentagon, have argued for a more aggressive approach to pressuring the Iranians, including targeted strikes that further weaken Tehran's position. Others are still pushing to give diplomacy a fair shot. Some in Trump's orbit also believe that Pakistan, which has been serving as the diplomatic mediator, is often sharing a more positive version of the Iranian position with the U.S. than what reflects reality. Think about that for a second. The mediator is being accused of softening the message. That means even the communication channel between these two countries is corrupted by suspicion. You cannot build a ceasefire, let alone a peace deal, on a foundation of distrust in the very people delivering the letters. Netanyahu also said on 60 Minutes that it was possible Iran's leadership could eventually be toppled, though he stopped short of predicting it. Is it possible? Yes. Is it guaranteed? No, he said. And that right there tells you something important about the Israeli strategic vision. Netanyahu is not just talking about stopping a nuclear program. He is talking about regime change. He is talking about the end of the Islamic Republic as a governing structure. And when that is on the table, even as a possibility, even as a maybe, you are no longer in the realm of arms control. You are in the realm of civilizational transformation. You are talking about attempting to fundamentally restructure the government of a nation of 90 million people who have already endured a devastating military assault and who have absolutely no intention of bowing to anyone. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei said everything Tehran proposed was reasonable and generous, not only for Iran's national interests, but also for the good and well-being of the region and the world. He called on Washington to end its blockade of Iranian ports and release Iranian assets frozen in foreign banks. And here is what that tells you. Iran is not behaving like a country on its knees. Iran is behaving like a country that believes it still has leverage. And the cold, hard truth is, it does. As long as the Strait of Hormuz remains choked, Iran has leverage. Every day that crude sits above $100 a barrel, Iran has leverage. Every day that 20,000 sailors remain stranded on ships that cannot move, Iran has leverage. The economic pain of this conflict is not one-directional, it is global, and a global pain is a global pressure on everyone, including Washington. Trump told reporters, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation," as he pushed for a deal. And while that statement drew headlines for its bluntness, I think it actually reveals something important about how this president frames the conflict. He sees it as a transaction, as a deal to be closed on his terms or not at all. And that transactional mindset is exactly what makes this situation so volatile right now. Because diplomacy is not a real estate negotiation. You cannot walk away from a sovereign nation the way you walk away from a bad property deal. When you walk away from Iran, the ships stay blocked. The oil stays off the market, the world keeps bleeding, and the pressure doesn't disappear. It just redirects itself into military planning rooms and briefing books. What we are watching right now is a president who is standing at a fork in the road. One path leads to a long, grinding diplomatic process that demands patience, concession, and the willingness to accept an Iran that still exists as a sovereign nuclear-capable state, not a nuclear weapon state, but a state with the knowledge and infrastructure to get there if pushed far enough. The other path leads to resumption of strikes, to another round of bombs falling on Iranian soil, to a nation that has already suffered enormously being pushed further into a corner from which it will fight back with everything it has left. Iran retaliated for the first wave of strikes by launching hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at Israel, U.S. military bases in the region, and at neighboring Arab countries including Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. That is what Iran looks like when it is struck. That is the response you get from a country with deep strategic patience and an extensive proxy network that stretches from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq to Syria. If Trump strikes again, do not expect Iran to simply absorb it and come crawling to the table. That is not who Iran is. That is not who Iran has ever been. This is a country that endured 8 years of war with Iraq in the 1980s and did not surrender. This is a country that absorbed sanctions for decades and did not surrender. This is a country that watched its generals get assassinated and did not surrender. Tehran's calculation has always been the same: outlast the pressure. And with oil above $100, with China still buying Iranian crude, with the global economy screaming for relief, with Trump heading to a Beijing summit where he may not get what he wants, Tehran believes it can outlast this too. The question now is not whether Trump has the military capability to strike Iran again. He absolutely does. The question is whether another round of strikes changes anything strategically, or whether it simply deepens a conflict that is already costing $29 billion, already choking the world's energy supply, and already pulling the United States into a confrontation that has no clean ending in sight. That is the question that should be keeping every American awake right now. Not whether Trump will strike, but whether, if he does, America will be any closer to peace when the dust settles. And based on everything we have seen, everything we know, and everything history tells us about this region, the honest answer is no.